I walked into that courtroom with nothing but a thin folder of papers and a heart that felt heavier than the marble floors beneath my feet. No lawyer beside me, no expensive suit, no one to stand up and fight for me, just me, a woman who had spent years believing she was invisible. My name is Elena. I was 38 years old that morning, and I had already lost almost everything that once made me feel safe. The house I had poured my savings into, the quiet life I thought I was building, the man I once called my husband. All of it had been stripped away piece by piece, until I stood there alone under the fluorescent lights, waiting for judgment. They said I was unstable. They said I was unfit. They said the evidence was clear. My ex-husband's new partner sat in the front row in a crisp blouse, smiling the way people smile when they think they have already won. My former in-laws whispered behind their hands. Even the bailiff looked past me as if I were already a lost cause. I had tried to hire help. I had called every number I could afford, but the money was gone, spent on lawyers who had quietly switched sides, on documents that somehow disappeared, on a life that had been rewritten without my consent. So I came alone. I told myself I would speak the truth and hope someone, anyone, would listen. The air in the room felt thick. I could hear the soft click of heels, the rustle of papers, the low murmur of people who had already decided my story for me. I kept my eyes on the empty chair where a lawyer should have sat. That empty chair felt like a second betrayal. I remembered the day everything began to crack. The soft promises, the late-night conversations where he told me I was the only one who understood him, the way he held my hand when the world felt too sharp. I had believed him. I had built my world around that belief. And then the silence came. The closed doors. The sudden coldness. The day I found the messages that were never meant for me. But what I didn't know that day was that the past has a way of walking into the present when you least expect it. The judge entered. Everyone rose. I stood with them, my hands trembling just enough that I had to press them against the table. He looked older than the photographs I had once seen in newspapers. But something about the set of his shoulders felt familiar in a way I could not place. He sat. He opened the file. He began the usual formalities. Then his eyes lifted. They rested on me for a long moment. The room seemed to grow quieter. His expression shifted, first confusion, then recognition, then something deeper. Something almost soft. He set the papers down carefully. And in a voice that carried across the entire courtroom, he said, "You don't remember me?" My heart stopped. The words hung in the air like smoke. I stared at him, searching his face, trying to pull a memory from the fog of years. He waited. The entire courtroom waited with him. I shook my head slowly. "I'm sorry. I don't—" He leaned forward just slightly. 15 years ago. A rainy night on the interstate. A young woman in a silver car. A truck that lost control. You pulled me out before the fire reached the cab. The memory hit me like cold water. I remembered the smoke. The smell of burning rubber. The man trapped, coughing, begging someone not to leave him. I had been 23, driving home from a night shift, exhausted and half asleep. I didn't think. I just moved. Broken glass cut my hands. Heat scorched my arms. I dragged him clear and stayed until the ambulance came. Then I left before anyone could ask my name. I never told anyone. Not even my family. It felt too raw, too close to something I didn't want to examine. I had forgotten his face. Life had moved on. Mine had shattered in quieter ways. But he had not forgotten. The courtroom shifted. My ex-husband's attorney stood quickly, voice sharp. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." The judge raised one hand. The attorney fell silent. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. All the careful lies that had been built against me. The forged documents. The whispered stories about my instability. The sudden disappearance of bank records suddenly felt thinner. The people who had tried to erase me looked smaller. But the pain did not vanish. It sat in my chest like a stone. I remembered the night I found the truth. The messages on his phone. The hotel receipts. The way he looked at me when I asked, as if I were the one who had broken something sacred. I remembered packing a bag in the dark while our daughter slept, trying not to cry loud enough to wake her. I remembered the custody papers that arrived with clinical cruelty, accusing me of things I had never done. I remembered standing in empty rooms, wondering how love could turn into something that wanted to destroy me. I had fought quietly at first. I tried to stay calm. I tried to be the reasonable one. But every time I reached for help, doors closed. Lawyers who once returned my calls stopped answering. Friends grew distant. Even my own reflection began to look like a stranger. The betrayal was not only his. It was the slow, deliberate way the world seemed to side with the louder voice. The prettier story. The one that made me the problem. Sitting in that courtroom, hearing the judge's quiet recognition, something inside me shifted. The shattered pieces of my pride did not suddenly become whole. But they stopped cutting quite so deeply. I realized I did not need to be perfect to deserve fairness. I only needed to be honest. I took a breath. My voice was steady when I finally spoke. I remember the rain, I said. I remember being afraid the truck would explode before I could get you free. I never expected this. The judge nodded once. His eyes were kind, but the kindness held steel. Neither did I, he answered. But here we are. What followed was not dramatic shouting or sudden applause. It was quieter, more precise, more devastating to the people who had tried to bury me. The judge ordered a full review of every document submitted against me. He requested the original bank records. He asked for the medical evaluations that had mysteriously painted me as unstable. He allowed me to speak without interruption while my former, husband's attorney grew pale. One by one, the carefully constructed lies began to crack. Emails that had been altered. Signatures that did not match. A witness who suddenly remembered a different version of events once the weight of the, court settled on him. The woman who had smiled so confidently in the front row stopped smiling. When the truth finally stood in the open, it did not need my anger to make it sharp. It simply existed, clear, undeniable. The custody order was reversed. The financial claims against me were dismissed. The attempts to paint me as unfit were struck from the record. My ex-husband and the people who had helped him faced consequences that reached far beyond that single courtroom. Some professional, some personal, all of them earned. I did not celebrate loudly. I walked out of that building into ordinary daylight, my daughter's hand in mine, and felt something I had not felt in years. The quiet right to exist without apology. Later, when the noise faded, I sat alone with a cup of tea and let the full weight of it settle. The man I once loved had chosen a version of life that required my erasure. The people around him had helped. And for a long time, I believed their version of me. But the truth has a way of surviving. Sometimes it waits years. Sometimes it walks into a courtroom, wearing a black robe and asks a simple question that changes everything. I am no longer the woman who entered that room believing she had already lost. I am the woman who left knowing that dignity is not given by others. It is claimed quietly by refusing to disappear. If you are carrying a similar weight, if someone has tried to rewrite your story, while you stood alone, hear this. The silence does not mean you are forgotten. The empty chair does not mean you are powerless. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up as yourself and let the truth speak. I showed up. The past recognized me, and justice, when it finally arrived, did not need to shout. It only needed to be heard.